Imagine a civilization so advanced they invented writing, mathematics, astronomy, and law all before 2000 BCE. That's Mesopotamia. For 6,000 years, it was the center of the world. Then it vanished, buried in desert sand for millennia. This is its story. Imagine standing on the banks of two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, around 6500 BCE. Behind you, endless desert. Before you, fertile plains where water brings life. This is Mesopotamia, Greek for the land between the rivers. Located in what is now modern Iraq, Kuwait, and parts of Syria, Turkey, and Iran. Here, something extraordinary is about to happen. For millions of years, humans have been hunters and gatherers, moving with the seasons, living in small bands. But here, in this river valley, people are beginning to settle permanently. They're planting crops, wheat and barley. They're domesticating animals, sheep, goats, cattle. They're building permanent villages. They don't know it, but they're starting a revolution, the Neolithic Revolution, the agricultural revolution that will transform humanity forever. Over the next 6 millennia, Mesopotamia will witness the birth of civilization itself. The first cities will rise here. The first writing will be invented. The first complex governments, the first laws, the first literature, the first mathematics, the first astronomy, all emerge from these river valleys. Mighty empires will conquer. This land, Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians. Kings will proclaim themselves gods. Priests will build massive temples. Warriors will forge armies that conquer the known world. And then, in 331 BCE, Alexander the Great will march through Babylon, and the ancient Mesopotamian world will end, absorbed into Hellenistic civilization. But the legacy of Mesopotamia lives on in our writing, our mathematics, our laws, our cities, our very concept of civilization. This is the story of Mesopotamia from 6500 BCE to 331 BC. The 6,000 years that created the foundation of human civilization. 6500 BCE. The last ice age ended about 5,000 years ago. The climate is warming. In the Fertile Crescent, that arc of land stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, conditions are perfect for agriculture. The earliest Mesopotamian settlements appear in the north, in the hills and foothills where rain falls regularly. Places like Jarmo in the Zagros Mountains and Tel Hassuna near modern Mosul. These aren't cities yet. They're villages of perhaps 150 to 300 people, living in mud brick houses, farming wheat and barley, herding animals. But they are revolutionary. Nonetheless, for the first time in human history, people are producing their own food rather than hunting and gathering it. This means surplus more food than immediately needed. Surplus means the population can grow. It means some people can specialize in crafts rather than food production. It means the beginning of social complexity. By 5500 BCE, settlements appeared. In southern Mesopotamia, in what's called the Ubaid period. This region presents challenges, almost no rainfall, scorching heat, floods from the rivers. But the soil, deposited by millennia of flooding, is incredibly fertile. The solution is irrigation, digging canals to bring river water to fields. It's labor-intensive and requires cooperation. Individual families can't do it alone. Communities must work together, organize labor, and maintain the canals. This cooperation drives social organization. Leaders emerge to coordinate work. Administrators keep records of labor contributions and crop distribution. Priests intercede with gods believed to control the floods and harvests. The seeds of civilization, literally and figuratively, are planted. Ubaid period villages grow larger. Tel al-Ubaid, near Ur, becomes a regional center. People develop distinctive pottery-painted ceramics that show increasing artistic sophistication. They build temples small at first, but marking the beginning of organized religion. Trade. Networks emerge. Obsidian from Turkey, precious stones from Iran, timber from the mountains, materials not available locally, are transported hundreds of miles. This means traders, middlemen, and the beginning of commerce. By 4000 BCE, southern Mesopotamia was dotted with large villages, some approaching 10,000 people. They're on the verge of becoming something new, something the world has never seen. Before cities. Around 4000 BCE, the Uruk period begins, named after the city of Uruk, which will become the world's first true city. Uruk grew to over 50,000 people by 3000 BCE, an unprecedented concentration of humanity. Massive mud brick walls, over 6 miles long, surround the city. At its heart stands the White Temple, built atop a raised platform, a precursor to the ziggurats that will define Mesopotamian architecture. Why do cities form? The answer is complex: agricultural. Surplus, certainly, but also defense, trade, religious authority, and perhaps simply the gravitational pull of population. Once a settlement reaches a certain size, it attracts more people, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. But Uruk isn't alone. By 3000 BCE, southern Mesopotamia, now called Sumer, was home to numerous city-states: Ur, Eridu, Lagash, Nippur, Kish, Umma. Each is independent, ruled by a king, and dominated by a temple to a patron deity. These city-states compete for water rights, trade routes, agricultural land. Sometimes competition is peaceful. Often it's violent. War becomes organized, systematic. Armies form, weapons develop, fortifications grow. The Sumerians also innovate technologically and intellectually. Around 3500 to 3200 BCE, they invented writing. One of history's most important innovations. It starts practically. Temple administrators need to track goods, grain stored, animals sacrificed, rations distributed. They develop a system of symbols pressed into clay tablets with a reed stylus. At first, these are simple pictographs. A symbol of a sheep means sheep, but writing quickly becomes more sophisticated. Symbols represent sounds, not just objects. This is cuneiform wedge-shaped marks that can express any word, any idea, any thought. Scribes become a professional class, spending years learning thousands of symbols. Writing transforms civilization. Knowledge can be preserved, transmitted across distance and time. Laws can be codified. History can be recorded. Literature can be created. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's first great works of literature, is written in Sumerian cuneiform. It tells of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, his friendship with the wild man Enkidu, and his quest for immortality, themes that still resonate today. Sumerians make other crucial innovations. They developed the wheel initially for pottery, then for transport. They create the plow, increasing agricultural productivity. They developed the base 60 number system, which is why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. They build ziggurats, massive stepped pyramids topped with temples. The ziggurat of Ur, dedicated to the moon god Nana, rises over 60 feet high, dominating the landscape for miles. Sumerian society is hierarchical. At the top are kings and priests. The king, called Lugal, or big man, rules with divine sanction. Priests control vast temple estates, collecting taxes in the form of grain, livestock, and labor. Below them are merchants, craftsmen, and scribes, an emerging middle class. Then farmers, the majority of the population. At the bottom are slaves, prisoners of war, debtors, children sold by desperate parents. Women's status varies. Some hold positions as priestesses. Some own property and conduct business. But generally, this is a patriarchal society where men dominate. For 1,000 years, Sumerian city-states flourish, fight, and innovate. They create the template for civilization cities, writing, complex government, organized religion, social stratification, warfare, but they remain politically fragmented. Each city-state jealously guards its independence. This makes them vulnerable to conquest. That conquest comes around 2340 BCE from the north in the form of Sargon of Akkad. Sargon of Akkad is one of history's first empire builders and one of its most mysterious figures. According to legend, he was born in secret, placed in a reed basket, and set adrift on the river, a story that will echo through history. Later attached to Moses and others. What we know for certain is that Sargon rises from humble origins to become cupbearer, a trusted servant to the king of Kish. He then overthrows the king, conquers the Sumerian city-states one by one, and creates history's first true empire, the Akkadian Empire, ruling from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Sargon's innovation is conquest and consolidation. Previous rulers controlled one city, maybe a few nearby towns. Sargon controls dozens of cities, hundreds of miles of territory, millions of people. He installs governors loyal to him. He stationed garrisons to enforce his rule. He standardizes weights and measures to facilitate trade. He also promotes the Akkadian language, a Semitic language different from Sumerian. Akkadian eventually became the lingua franca of Mesopotamia, though Sumerian remains the language of scholarship and religion, like Latin in medieval Europe. Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, expands the empire further. He claims divinity, declaring himself a god and having himself depicted wearing the horned crown of divinity. This is hubris on a scale the world hasn't seen. Naram-Sin fights constantly against mountain tribes, rebellious cities, foreign invaders. Victory inscriptions describe him crushing enemies, taking tribute, earning the fear and respect of all peoples. But the Akkadian Empire is overstretched. Rebellion is constant. Climate change, a severe drought around 2200 BC, disrupts agriculture, causing famine and migration. Barbarian tribes called Gushins invade from the Zagros Mountains. Around 2150 BCE, the Akkadian Empire collapsed. The Gushins rule briefly a dark age, about which we know little. Then Sumerian city-states reassert independence. The Neo-Sumerian period centered on Ur, the third dynasty of Ur, or Ur III, represents Sumerian culture's last flowering. Kings like Ur-Nammu build magnificent ziggurats, commission literature, and create elaborate bureaucracies. Scribes produce thousands of administrative tablets. We have more documentation from Ur III than any previous period, but this renaissance is brief. Around 2000 BCE, Ur fell to Elamites from the east and Amorites from the west. The Sumerian language gradually dies out, though it remains a scholarly language for another 1,000 years. The Sumerian people don't disappear. They're absorbed into the broader Mesopotamian population. But their political dominance ends. A new power is rising, Babylon. Babylon starts as a minor city on the Euphrates River. Under Amorite rulers, it grows in importance. Then, around 1792 BCE, a young king named Hammurabi ascended the throne. Hammurabi will become one of history's most famous rulers, remembered for the law code that bears his name. But first, he's a conqueror. For decades, Hammurabi expanded Babylonian power through warfare and diplomacy. He conquers rival cities Larsa, Eshnauna, Mari. He makes alliances, then betrays them when convenient. He's pragmatic, ruthless, and effective. By 1755 BCE, Hammurabi controlled all of Mesopotamia, from the Persian Gulf to Assyria. Babylon becomes the region's dominant city, a position it will hold with interruptions for over 1,000 years. But Hammurabi's greatest legacy isn't military. It's legal. Around 1755 BCE, he issued the Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on a 7-foot-tall, black basalt stele topped with a relief showing Hammurabi receiving the laws from Shamash, the sun god and god of justice. The code contains 282 laws covering everything from property rights to family relations, from commercial transactions to criminal punishment. It's not the world's first law code. Earlier Sumerian codes exist, but it's the most complete, surviving code from ancient Mesopotamia. The laws are specific and detailed. If a builder constructs a house that collapses and kills the owner, the builder is executed. If it kills the owner's son, the builder's son is executed. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The principle of lex talionis appears repeatedly, but punishments aren't equal for all. If an aristocrat injures another aristocrat, equal retaliation applies. If an aristocrat injures a commoner, he pays a fine. If a slave is injured, the penalty is even less. Justice is class-based, but the very existence of written laws is revolutionary. Laws are public, knowable. They limit arbitrary punishment. They establish that even kings rule under law, not just by personal whim. Hammurabi is also an administrator. Thousands of letters survive, showing him managing his empire in detail, ordering canals dug, settling legal disputes, appointing officials, regulating commerce. Under Hammurabi, Babylon becomes Mesopotamia's cultural center, the city's patron. God Marduk rises to supremacy in the Mesopotamian pantheon. The Enuma Elish, a creation epic describing how Marduk created the world by defeating the chaos goddess Tiamat, becomes the region's central religious text. Babylonian astronomy advances. Priests observe celestial movements meticulously, recording lunar cycles, planetary positions, eclipses. This astronomical knowledge, developed over centuries, will later influence Greek and Islamic astronomy. Mathematics flourishes. Babylonians used sophisticated mathematics, quadratic equations, Pythagorean theorem, 1,000 years before Pythagoras, astronomical calculations. Their base 60 system allows complex computations, but Hammurabi's empire doesn't survive him. His successors are weak. Babylonia contracts, losing territories. Then, around 1600 BCE, disaster strikes from an unexpected direction. The Hittites, an Indo-European people from Anatolia, modern Turkey, raid Babylon. They sack the city, carrying off treasures and ending the first Babylonian dynasty. Then comes a mysterious people called Kassites, possibly from the Zagros Mountains. They conquer Babylonia and rule for over 400 years, the longest dynasty in Babylonian history. But the Kassite period is poorly documented. We know they adopted Babylonian culture, maintained continuity, but left few records. Meanwhile, in northern Mesopotamia, a new power is rising, one that will become the ancient world's most feared military force. Assyria. The Assyrians are named for their original capital, Assur, on the upper Tigris River. For centuries, they're a minor power, overshadowed by Babylonia to the south and the Hittite Empire to the west. But around 1365 BCE, under King Ashur-uballit I, Assyria began expanding. This starts the Middle Assyrian period, an era of growing power and military innovation. Assyrian kings like Tukulti-Ninurta I and Tiglath-Pileser I conquer neighboring territories, establishing Assyria as a regional power. But their empire is unstable, contracting under weak rulers, expanding under strong ones. Then comes the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, a mysterious period when civilizations throughout the eastern Mediterranean collapse. The Hittite Empire vanishes. Mycenaean Greece falls. Egypt weakens. The Sea Peoples, mysterious invaders, devastate coastal regions. Assyria survives, but contracts. For 2 centuries, it struggled. Then, around 911 BCE, the Neo-Assyrian Empire emerges, and it's terrifying. Neo-Assyrian kings are military geniuses. They created history's first professional standing army. Previous armies were malicious, farmers called up for campaigns. The Assyrian army is permanent, trained, disciplined, and huge. At its height, it numbers over 100,000 soldiers. The Assyrians pioneer military technology. They use iron weapons extensively superior to bronze. They employ cavalry effectively mounted archers and lancers. They build siege engines, battering rams, siege towers, ramps that can breach any fortification. Their tactics are sophisticated. They have military intelligence networks, advanced scouts, coordinated infantry, cavalry, archer tactics. They cross rivers using inflated animal skins as flotation devices. They fight in mountains, deserts, and marshes. They're also brutal. Assyrian kings boast in their inscriptions about atrocities: cities destroyed, populations massacred or deported, captives impaled, flayed alive, or burned. These aren't exaggerations. They're deliberate propaganda meant to terrify enemies into submission. I built a pillar over against the city gate, one king records, and I flayed all the chiefs who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skins. Terror is a weapon. Often, cities surrender rather than face Assyrian assault. King Ashurnasirpal II, 883 to 859 BCE, expanded the empire dramatically. He moves the capital to Kalhu, modern Nimrud, and builds a magnificent palace, decorated with alabaster reliefs depicting his military victories, hunting expeditions, and court ceremonies. His son, Shalmaneser III, continues expansion, campaigning for 31 of his 35-year reign. He fights coalitions of Syrian states, engages with Israel and Judah, mentioned in the Bible, and reaches the Mediterranean dot. But the empire's greatest expansion comes under Tiglath-Pileser III, 745 to 727 BCE. He reorganizes the empire's administration, dividing it into provinces ruled by governors. He practices mass deportation, moving conquered populations to different parts of the empire to prevent rebellion. This policy is brutal but effective. The Bible's lost tribes of Israel are lost because the Assyrians deported them after conquering the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BCE. Sargon II, 721 to 705 BCE, named after the ancient Akkadian conqueror, builds a new capital at Dur-Sharrukin, modern Khorsabad. Though it's abandoned after his death, his son, Sennacherib, 705 to 681 BCE, moves the capital to Nineveh and makes it the ancient world's greatest city. Nineveh has massive walls 12 kilometers around, with 15 gates. The population reaches perhaps 100,000, enormous for the ancient world. Sennacherib built the palace without rival, decorated with miles of relief sculptures. He creates parks and gardens, brings water through aqueducts, and boasts of his conquests, though his siege of Jerusalem fails. As recorded in the Bible, Sennacherib's grandson Ashurbanipal, 668 to 627 BCE, is the empire's last great king, and perhaps its most cultured. He's educated, literate in Sumerian and Akkadian, and a patron of learning. Ashurbanipal creates the ancient world's greatest library at Nineveh, over 30,000 clay tablets collected from throughout Mesopotamia. When archaeologists excavated it in the 19th century, they recovered much of our knowledge of Mesopotamian literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh. But Ashurbanipal is also brutal. When the city of Elam rebels, he destroys it utterly. I destroyed, I devastated, I burned. With fire, I left not one alive. After Ashurbanipal's death in 627 BCE, the empire collapsed rapidly. Provincial governors declare independence. Babylonia rebels under Nabopolassar, a Chaldean leader. The Medes, an Iranian people, attack from the east. In 614 BCE, the Medes sacked Azor. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians besieged Nineveh. After 3 months, the city falls. The Assyrian Empire, the ancient world's greatest military power, is destroyed. The destruction is so complete that Nineveh becomes a legend. The Greek historian Xenophon, passing the ruins in 401 BCE, doesn't even know what city it was. But from the ashes of Assyria, one final Mesopotamian empire emerges. With Assyria destroyed, Nabopolassar of Babylon establishes the Neo-Babylonian Empire, also called the Chaldean Empire. His son, Nebuchadnezzar II, 605 to 562 BCE, became one of history's most famous rulers. In the Bible, he's the king who destroys Jerusalem, burns Solomon's temple, and carries the Jews into Babylonian captivity. In Babylonian records, he's a great builder and conqueror. Nebuchadnezzar campaigns extensively. He defeated Egypt at the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BCE, establishing Babylonian dominance over Syria and Palestine. When Judah rebels, he besieges Jerusalem twice, finally destroying it in 586 BCE and deporting thousands to Babylon. The Jewish exile in Babylon profoundly shapes Judaism. Far from their homeland and temple, Jews develop new religious practices, synagogues, written scriptures, a focus on law and community that will allow Judaism to survive without a temple or homeland. But Nebuchadnezzar's greatest achievement is rebuilding Babylon into the ancient world's most magnificent city. Babylon already has a long history, but Nebuchadnezzar makes it legendary. He builds massive walls, supposedly so wide that chariots can race on top. The Greek historian Herodotus, who visits decades later, is awestruck. He constructs the Ishtar Gate, a massive entrance decorated with glazed blue bricks and reliefs of dragons and bulls leading to the processional way, the main avenue through the city. He rebuilds or enlarges Esagila, the temple of Marduk, and the massive ziggurat at Emenanke, the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. This ziggurat, rising perhaps 300 feet high, is likely the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel, and he supposedly built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, terraced gardens with exotic plants and ingenious irrigation, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Whether they actually existed is debated. Number Babylonian text mentions them, though Greek and Roman writers describe them in detail. Perhaps they're confused with gardens at Nineveh, or perhaps they're purely legendary. Neo-Babylonian culture reaches great heights. Astronomy becomes increasingly sophisticated. Babylonian astronomers accurately predict eclipses, track planetary movements, and develop detailed star catalogs. This knowledge spreads to Greece and influences early Western astronomy. Mathematics continues advancing. The concept of zero, while not fully developed, appears in Babylonian astronomical calculations. Literature and learning flourish. Scribes copy and preserve ancient texts. Priests maintain temples and perform elaborate rituals. Babylon becomes a cosmopolitan city, with Aramaic becoming the common language of commerce throughout the Near East. But the Neo-Babylonian Empire is short-lived. After Nebuchadnezzar's death, succession disputes weakened the empire. His son Evil-Merodach is assassinated after 2 years. Neriglissar ruled for 4 years. His young son Labashi-Marduk ruled just 9 months before being overthrown. Then comes Nabonidus, 556 to 539 BCE, perhaps the strangest king in Mesopotamian history. He's a religious reformer or heretic, depending on perspective, who tries to elevate the moon god Sin above Marduk. This infuriates Babylon's priests and populace. Nabonidus spends years in Arabia, leaving his son Belshazzar to rule Babylon. The Bible records Belshazzar's feast, where mysterious writing appears on the wall. Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, which Daniel interprets as predicting Babylon's fall. The prophecy proves accurate. In 559 BCE, Cyrus II became king of Persia, a vassal state of the Median Empire. Within a few years, he overthrows the Median king and creates the Persian Empire. Cyrus is a military genius and skilled diplomat. He conquers Lydia in Anatolia, absorbing its legendary wealth. Then he turns toward Babylon. By 539 BCE, Babylon was vulnerable, militarily weak, politically divided, religiously conflicted. When Cyrus invades, he's welcomed by many Babylonians who see him as liberating them from Nabonidus. Cyrus enters Babylon. Peacefully, he claims to restore proper worship of Marduk. He issues the Cyrus Cylinder, a clay document, where he presents himself as chosen by Marduk to rule justly. The Cyrus Cylinder also declares a policy of tolerance. Conquered peoples can maintain their religions and customs. He allows Jews exiled by Nebuchadnezzar to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, an act celebrated in the Bible. Under Persian rule, Mesopotamia becomes just one province, albeit an important one, of a vast empire stretching from Egypt to India. Babylon remains a major city. Persian kings like Darius the first maintained palaces there. But politically, Mesopotamia is no longer independent. Its history as a land of rival city-states and competing empires ends. Cultural continuity continues. Cuneiform writing persists. Temples function. Ancient traditions endure. But the creative period is over. In 482 BCE, Babylon rebelled against Persian rule. Xerxes I crushes the rebellion and, according to Herodotus, destroys the temple of Marduk and melts down the golden statue of the god. Whether this is true is debated, but Babylon's importance declines. Then, in 331 BCE, came the final transformation. Alexander the Great of Macedon defeats the Persian king Darius III at the Battle of Gaugamela. He then marches to Babylon, which surrenders without resistance. Alexander is impressed by the city and plans to make it his capital. He orders the restoration of Azagila Temple, Kenizigaret. He envisions Babylon as the center of a new empire blending Greek and Eastern cultures. But in 323 BCE, Alexander died in Babylon at age 32, possibly from malaria, possibly from poisoning. His empire fractures among his generals. Babylon is caught in wars between the Seleucid and Parthian empires. Gradually, Babylon is abandoned. The Euphrates River shifts course. Irrigation systems collapse. The city becomes ruins, eventually buried under sand. By the time of Christ, Babylon is a legend. The Mesopotamian languages Sumerian and Akkadian are dead. Cuneiform writing is forgotten. The great ziggurats crumble. The tablets are buried. For 2,000 years, Mesopotamian civilization vanishes from human memory, preserved only in biblical references and Greek accounts that seem like mythology. Then, in the 19th century, archaeologists began excavating. They discover Nineveh, Babylon, Uruk. They find thousands of tablets. A French scholar, Jean-François Champollion, deciphers cuneiform just as he deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphics. Suddenly, Mesopotamia returns. The Epic of Gilgamesh is read for the first time in millennia. Hammurabi's laws are studied. Sumerian mathematics is understood. Assyrian reliefs are displayed in museums. The cradle of civilization is rediscovered. 6,000 years. From the first villages to Alexander's empire. From the invention of agriculture to the conquest of the ancient world. Mesopotamia gave civilization its foundations. Writing, so we could record knowledge. Mathematics, so we could calculate and understand. Law, so we could live together in cities. Literature, so we could express the human condition. Government, so we could organize complex societies. Astronomy, so we could understand the heavens. The wheel, the plow, the sail technologies that changed everything. Cities, empires, warfare, political structures that still shape our world. The 60-second minute, the 360-degree circle, the 7-day week measures of time we still use. Even our stories come from Mesopotamia. The flood narrative in Gilgamesh predates the biblical flood by centuries. The idea of a paradise garden. The concept of divine law given to humanity. The fear of chaos and the need for order. Mesopotamia was never one civilization. It was many. Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, and dozens of smaller peoples. They fought constantly, conquered each other repeatedly, spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, yet they shared a common culture, a common heritage, a common way of understanding the world. They built on each other's achievements, preserved each other's knowledge, and created a continuity spanning millennia. When Alexander entered Babylon, 6,000 years of independent Mesopotamian civilization ended. But its legacy didn't end. It passed to Greeks, Romans, Arabs, and eventually to us. Every time you check the time, you're using Sumerian mathematics. Every time you read, you're benefiting from Mesopotamian innovation. Every time you live under law, you're inheriting Hammurabis. Legacy. The rivers still flow, the Tigris and Euphrates, though much diminished. The land between them is scarred by modern wars. But beneath the soil lie thousands of sites, millions of tablets, countless stories waiting to be discovered. The cradle of civilization rocked humanity from barbarism to civilization. That journey began in Mesopotamia. In a very real sense, it's where we all come from. This is where history begins.